This is the Grove, next to the main A2 in Sittingbourne. Today it's a community sports ground and home to Gore Court Cricket Club. Behind the main sports field are these woods.
It is believed that a house existed in these woods from at least the 1770s, when the author Hasted referred to a shooting seat built by Arthur Gore. This was part of the Bobbing Manor estate, owned by a Colonel Tyndale. Valentine Simpson purchased the estate around 1796. He was a wealthy innkeeper and landowner. The house was to remain in the Simpson family until the 1920s. The house was let out to various people for a time, and in 1832 the house passed to Valentine Simpson's son, the Reverend George Simpson, who was the vicar of Bobbing. He decided to live there himself, and this watercolour was made at about this time. The house appears to have been quite modest in size at this time, with a thatched roof, and it's considerably less grand than the mansion it later became.
Access to the house was via one of two drives leading up from the main London road. One on the western Quay Street side of the site, and the other on the eastern opposite side.
In 1841, William August Munn was living at Rose Hill with his family and staff. In 1847, it was described as a neat Gothic residence, and George Simpson, the son of Valentine, was living there with two staff. There was also a cottage where a servant lived with their family. George Simpson Sr. died in 1854, and his son, the Reverend George Stringer Simpson, also the vicar of Bobbing, lived there from 1854 to 1888. After his death, the house with its gardens and avenue and about 4.5 acres was let by the Simpson family to tenants. In the early 1900s, directories show a Walter Stagg to be living there with his family. Later on, an Edgar Guy de Matos. Probably just after the First World War, the house finally passed out of the hands of the Simpson family, and in 1926 the directory shows Admiral Herbert Doyne, a retired naval surgeon, to be in residence. By this time the house was of 3 stories and had a hall, dining room and drawing rooms, a large kitchen, 7 bedrooms, dressing room, bathroom and 2 indoor WCs. At some stage it also had a large conservatory at the front. It had a large cellar and a separate wing for the servants' quarters and kitchen. Next to the servants' quarters was the gardener's or chauffeur's cottage. Behind the main house stood the dairy, a collection of outbuildings around a square courtyard with stables and other small buildings. At the front of the house was a large tree and a croquet lawn. Along the main driveway there were tennis courts to the right and a walled vegetable garden to the left.
Much of this drive still exists today, even though the house is long gone.
Admiral Doyne had a gardener and chauffeur named Bill Colmer, who lived in the chauffeur's cottage. After the house had gone, several people wrote to the local paper, the East Kent Gazette, with their memories. Bill Colmer's sister-in-law, Frida Jordan, recounted how she often visited him to play with his young son, John. She said it was a delightful place to visit and often used to peek through the gate at the big house with its beautiful gardens, lovingly tended by Bill. Admiral Doyne eventually sold parts of the grounds for use as a cricket and hockey ground. He died on January the 23rd, 1936 at the Royal Naval Hospital, Chatham, aged 75, and the house was sold. The next owners were probably Mr. and Mrs. Stocker, who purchased the house in about 1938. The Stockers had previously lived in the old manor house in Quay Street. Unfortunately, soon after moving to Rose Hill, Mr. Stocker died, leaving his widow to live there alone, with a Miss Brown living next door in the gardener's cottage. Mrs. Stocker lived there for 30 years until she was about 96, and then, following a particularly nasty fall in about 1969, she spent her final years in Milton Regis Hospital for the Elderly. In another description of Rose Hill, a Mrs. Pat Sharp drew a plan of the layout of the house as she remembered it. Another memory of Rose Hill sent to the local paper came from a man who, as a 7-year-old boy, was taking a pleasant stroll through the woods with his father one day, when suddenly an old lady appeared from nowhere and told them they were trespassing on private land.
It was not the sort of encounter you would expect or welcome in the middle of a wood, and the boy was petrified.
He recalled how you could see the upper part of the house from the main road, although in the summertime it was partially obscured by the trees. In about 1975, the boy, whose name is John, heard from some friends that the old lady had died, so a group of them took the opportunity to get a close look at the house, which was by then totally derelict. The only part of it not covered in trees and foliage was the front facade. It was mostly of cream-painted wood, with a few steps up to the main door and a balcony running right across the front, with 2 semicircular bay windows on the right-hand side. The ground floor stood about 3 to 4 feet above ground level. There were 3 floors in total. At the rear of the property was a single-floor kitchen extension with a sloping roof. Outside was a flight of steps leading down into a cellar of about 5 rooms beneath the main house. On the left-hand side of the house, hidden behind tall trees and undergrowth, stood a double-storey brick extension standing at least twice the width of the main house. Across the drive was a bungalow where he believed the caretaker had once lived. There were also some brick-built garages backing onto the playing field on the north side. This is one of our best descriptions of Rose Hill in its last days. The woods encroached on the house and grounds, and it became a spooky place to fascinate children. Miss Brown lived on in the cottage as a caretaker for a while, but after she left, the house started to become a ruin.
All the local children who played in the park adjoining these woods, myself included, knew of an old lady up near the house, and only the very brave would venture near it for fear of her.
In the 1970s, it became a danger to inquisitive people. As well as being vandalised, it was set alight several times, and a child was injured when he discovered a shotgun cartridge in the building. Swale Borough Council acquired the area, and after much discussion it was agreed to demolish the building in 1977, so that only traces of the footings remained. Local historian the late John Clancy researched and wrote about the house in various publications, and I was inspired to see what remained of the property in 2013 after asking John to contribute a chapter to our book on historic houses of the area. I took a few photographs and reported back to John. We thought that this would make a great site for further investigation, and subsequently Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership and the Heritage Research Group of Sittingbourne did a proper excavation and study of the site, assisted by pupils from Grove Park School, uncovering the layout of the house and many parts of the floor and other finds. The footings were quite extensive and were clearly visible in places.
At Rose Hill today there's an information board in the Gore Court clubhouse. The house has certainly fascinated local people for the last 50 years or more, and I'm sure that there's much more to learn.
You can read more about this house in either of these 2 publications, available through the museum. If you have found this video interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website.